Good morning, everyone. It is nice to have all of you here. My name is Rehan Khakbaz Mogatam. I'm also one of the student organizers and the moderator for today's session. We're gonna start the symposium now. Our first lecture is titled Suicidality and Existential Phenomena by Ms. Kat Bashakevitz. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Miss, do you have access? Can you share your PowerPoint? You can start whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you greatly for the beautiful introduction and to the entire team who organized this International Online Symposium on Suicide and for inviting me to present here. My name is Kat Bashakevitz. I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Denver, a researcher who studies how an existential approach can be helpful in therapeutically addressing suicidality. I also study suicide survivorship and developing suicide prevention training for therapists. I have been a therapist for about 7 years, and I specialize in trauma and suicidality. I am also a therapist educator and teach an advanced suicidology course. I got into this work because I've always wondered, why do people live? Working clinically and researching suicidality, this question has also inspired me to ask, how do people live? Because it is so hard to be a human on Earth. People report feeling more isolated and alone than ever before. In the United States and globally, inequality is growing. We are all facing the climate crisis together as humans on Earth right now. We are all facing the rise of the internet and how this impacts our personal and work lives. Sadly, the United States government has historically and currently terrorized people around the world, very recently in the beautiful country of Iran. Inside the United States, we also feel pain as the Trump administration terrorizes American people, specifically people of color, further highlighting inequality. So while we are experiencing unique modern-day socio-political problems and horrors and pain on systemic levels, we are also experiencing the human condition. And the human condition is the most brutal, painful, beautiful, sweet experience I could imagine. I imagine most of us in this space, if not all of us, know the deep pain of grieving a loved one. Maybe you know heartbreak, betrayal, feeling lost and confused about life. Many, if not all of us, have experienced health problems, maybe health crises. Most of us know a life that lighten what might feel like a burden of humanhood at times. Connection with others, beautiful art, a nourishing meal, watching a sunset. Noticing and naming the sweet parts of life is an essential practice within suicide prevention work. Because honesty about the painfulness of life might lead to wanting to die. And to me, this reaction makes sense. The pain of life can lead some of us to want to kill ourselves, which is both different and similar to wanting to die. A surprising experience for me working with suicidality is how hopeful this work can be. For instance, how good people I work with clinically are at keeping themselves alive despite wanting to die. In fact, every person I have ever met who has tried to kill themselves and survived is glad to be alive for some reason, to experience something or know someone that they would not have known if they had died. How can we better understand these experiences? We can look to existential storytelling. Myths are cultural stories that can situate and contextualize the stories we tell ourselves and each other about our human condition. The myth of Sisyphus is a story by Camus, an existential writer. The story goes, Sisyphus made the gods very angry as he was clever and tried to cheat death. His actions were punished by the gods, and he was condemned to roll a heavy boulder up a hill every day just for it to fall down at the end of the day for all of eternity. We can identify metaphors in this story. Let's take a lighthearted example. For instance, no matter how much laundry you might have done this week, we still will have to do laundry next week. It can feel absurd and meaningless to always have this laundry in rotation, especially when we're feeling depressed, low energy, maybe we're feeling ill or tired. And yet, every week, the laundry will have to be done. So let me finish explaining the myth of Sisyphus. Every day he rolls this boulder up the hill just for it to return to the bottom of the hill. And reading this myth, I question, how can he do this? How can he possibly live in such a meaninglessness, absurd, horrible situation? Horrible is my own label, my own meaning I make of Sisyphus' story. Yet Camus at the end of the story shares, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. And that can feel like the most radical, crazy, absurd part of this story. And yet, people on Earth know how to navigate this absurdity and meaninglessness with immense grace. People on Earth navigate horrible situations like war, abuse, human trafficking, climate disasters, losing everything. And yet, people know how to live. And people even experience emotions like happiness in this absurd place called Earth. As was said earlier, Camus called suicide the one truly serious philosophical problem, which I appreciate because it humanizes people considering suicide. Suicide is an option, and an option people grapple with to various extents. Yet, Camus sees dying by suicide as reducing our empowerment, because when we cease to exist, our meaning ceases to exist as well. He urges us through this story to utilize our existential freedom to create meaning in our lives so we do not fall into existential despair. For this is why we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Now, let's discuss some clinical implications of existential themes like meaninglessness. Existential therapy can address the unique subjective experiences of individuals affected by suicidality. The goal of the existential therapist is to get as curious and open-minded as possible to truly hear, to the best of our ability, how people experiencing suicidality are making meaning of living and wanting to die. It's up to the therapist if they want to use precise language like, how do you make meaning of that? Because we can also use other language in therapeutic settings like, what did that teach you? If the client is religious or spiritual, I might ask, what do you think God or the universe is trying to tell you? Just as everyone experiences the existential human condition differently, existential therapy looks different depending on the therapist. Yet, commonalities between existential therapists include an attunement to themes with meaning, authenticity, freedom and responsibility with our actions, our attitudes and beliefs around death, and isolation and relatedness. Interventions I utilize within this approach include instilling hope, practicing gratitude, connecting other therapy topics to suicidality to explore deeper. For instance, maybe saying, "Wow, this breakup sounds really challenging. How is this influencing your thoughts about killing yourself?" Other interventions include inviting discussion and attunement for the client's emotions, thoughts, and their bodily experiences. We want to empower our clients to grow in their emotional capacity. We do not want to overwhelm them. So this work must be done collaboratively because I trust my clients to tell me when they are feeling overwhelmed. Dialectical behavioral therapy has wonderful emotional regulation tools to draw upon for this work. This is especially important as clients are more likely to survive suicidal crises when they have a diverse range of coping skills they can choose from and utilize. Emotional regulation skills and tools are needed to help clients establish safety within and outside of therapy. To better understand and connect with clients, curiosity and empathy must be applied to explore clients' unique expression of suicidality. Chu and colleagues created the cultural theory and model of suicide within the North American context. And their research can help therapists better conceptualize how diversity in culture impacts how suicidality is experienced. Finally, protective factors against suicidality must be explored. My favorite question to spur this is, why do you stay alive? Because there is no reason too small for living. In fact, it is such an honor to receive and know what clients live for. An existential intervention also includes using presence. This can be explored through psychosomatic exploration, silence, verbally connecting, even art. Modeling true presence through active listening is another powerful form of connection. Now let's further discuss existential isolation and relatedness within therapeutic work with suicidality. Existential isolation is feeling completely alone, regardless of being around others. Existential relatedness claims that while we can experience isolation, we only know isolation because of our connections with others. A specific existential risk factor for suicidal behavior is isolation. In fact, the leading suicide theory in the United States is Joiner's interpersonal theory of suicide. This classifies lack of belonging or isolation as a risk factor. The therapeutic alliance or relationship between the client and the therapist can be a protective factor against suicidality, as this connection encourages existential relatedness with another person and the client's relatedness within themselves. In other words, connection is a powerful force in this work and an essential component of suicide prevention. I found authenticity as a way to operationalize the evidence-based real relationship, a research construct which has been found to correlate with higher therapeutic alliance outcomes. In existential language, I want my clients to know that just like them, I am a human who grapples with why and how we can live. In order for me to do good work with clients, we both need safety. We can facilitate conversations around safety through safety plans and as the basis of what is needed to embark on the therapeutic journey together. On a relational level, existential therapy can be used as a treatment for suicidality and a form of connection. Existential philosophy can provide a framework for therapists to get curious about how clients experience their human condition and why they want and don't want to end their human experience. Most clients have reasons to die and reasons to live. It is our job to hold space with empathy and care so clients don't feel as alone and as isolated in their wishes to die. We must consider how their cultural background and identities influence their human condition. We also must ask them to put words to their reasons for living, because when we are in a suicidal crisis, reasons for living are much harder to remember than reasons we might want to die. Reasons for living and reminders of our reasons for living can take many forms. Maybe this is a picture of loved ones on our mirror, or an uplifting song. It is also the task of the existential therapist to grapple with their own reasons for living and how they make sense of how and why we live. Connecting with people is natural and human and healthy. And systems of oppression, like racism and sexism, for example, aim to isolate and separate us from each other, which are risk factors for suicidality. Therefore, true suicide prevention work aligns with liberation efforts. Liberation is the idea that people are inherently worthy and deserving of things like freedom, peace, and connection. Liberation efforts align with suicide prevention because they both hold the idea that life can be worth living. A powerful way to instill hope is to learn about people's resilience and courage in facing oppression, which can unleash waves of solidarity within us. For instance, learning about resistance efforts in the civil rights movement in the United States provides powerful true stories of resilience in seeking liberation. To further illustrate this idea of existential liberation, we can consider relational and systemic levels. Relational existential liberation can include things like curiosity, affirming the identities of those around us, cultural reflection, and empathy. These tools are immensely important within therapy and can also be used within friendships, with family, within our communities. Existential liberation on a systemic level includes advocacy efforts for oppressed peoples, resistance to this oppression, and empathy for people everywhere. This also includes collaboration efforts. The International Symposium on Suicide is a beautiful example of collaboration on an international level to reduce and prevent death by suicide. In our absurd world, this is some of the most radical work we can do. And I am so grateful we get to do this work together. Thank you, everyone, for your presence during this presentation. I'll now transition to answering any questions we might have.
Thank you very much for that heartfelt and insightful speech. It was very interesting. Everyone, you can ask your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen if you want. You can type your questions. Meanwhile, I forgot to ask this. As you know, the meeting is being recorded. I wanted to get permission of whether it's okay to share the video of your lecture on our YouTube platform and to also give access to the participants to the videos later.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you. There is one question here. Someone is asking, is the world meaningless? So, would you want to address that? I suppose existential brings up this sort of conversations always.
Thank you for this question. This is such an important question when it comes to being human on Earth. Some people would say, yes, life is inherently meaningless, and it is our job to create meaning of our life. However, there's many other people that would say, yes, life is meaningless and life has meaning. And it is our job to interrogate these questions within ourselves and utilize this inquiry to reflect and better get to know ourselves and better connect with other people. So ultimately, I would ask that same question back to you and encourage you all to reflect on not only your experiences with meaninglessness, but also meaning within your life.
Okay, and then there is another question. I'm guessing this is actually from a psychologist. She's saying, how can we practice curiosity in our relationship with the people who come to us? So, do you have any tips and tricks on that?
Yes, again, fabulous question. For me, curiosity requires that I put my judgment aside. So, empathy is a really helpful tool because judgment might say, I am different from this person, and my curiosity allows me to say, if I experienced what they experienced, it makes sense for them to be there because I could see myself being in that same position. And this empathy allows me to lean in with more curiosity and question, but this is not me, this is someone else. I would love to know more about their specific experience with suicidality, for example. And I try to get as open-minded as possible to dive into this curiosity with open-ended questions.
Sorry, I mute myself and then I forget. Thank you very much for that. Someone else typed that they think what gives life meaning is in love and loving people. So if you want to comment on that.
What a beautiful takeaway. And this very conversation is modeling how meaning making is made, right? Because someone asked, is life inherently meaningless? And someone else provided wisdom and insight and said, well, this is how I make meaning. This is also done in therapeutic work. Humans are naturally really good at making meaning, even when it doesn't feel like it. Me saying life is meaningless is actually me making meaning of my experience as a human. So, reframing how we're making meaning and being more open-minded about those things can also help us identify the meaning making happening in the therapeutic space.
Okay, and then I wanted to ask a question since we have time. I would like to know that, in your opinion, the qualities and characteristics of a person who is becoming an existential clinical psychologist, do you think that, for example, it requires compassion? Do you think that there are specific characteristics which help to have this approach more effectively with clients?
Wonderful question. I am endlessly inspired by compassion. So, for me personally, this is an essential component of not only how I do therapy, but how I interact with people in general. So, I would encourage every existential therapist to reflect on their own values and question, how can I bring these things into the therapy space? This is why authenticity can be a really helpful framework because we can feel when people are being genuine. And clients are really good at that. And genuineness allows us to connect as humans with other humans that might be really different from us. And that is such a magical part of being human. Anyone can do it as long as it's genuine and it comes from a good place in our heart. So, empathy, compassion, whatever we call it, these can be really beautiful, wonderful tools to utilize within that space and also enrich our lives in general, enrich our connections with our neighbors, with our friends, with our family.
Okay, thank you. And then there is another one. They say you mentioned that in clinical setting, it would be useful to bring other experiences of clients' suicidal experience, such as how a breakup might affect a client's desire for suicide. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yes, thank you so much for following up on that. So, there's a misconception that suicidality must be treated separately than other therapeutic issues that we're talking about. And it is much more powerful when we can invite everything together. So, for instance, if a client's diagnosed with depression or anxiety, I think it's our job to get really curious about how those conditions impact their suicidality. This also applies to many other diagnoses and whatever is coming up for the client. This is also relevant when we're doing trauma work and relational work in general, as well as whatever the client's bringing up. So rather than isolating suicidality as one part of a client's experience, we want to bring it in many different threads to explore it from different angles. And this is important because suicide is a taboo topic, and taboo topics can be very isolating when we're keeping it all within ourselves. Just as the connection in the therapeutic alliance is a protective factor against suicidality, modeling that curiosity and normalizing that we can experience suicidality without acting on these thoughts can be very liberating and freeing for clients.
Okay, and then the last question. Someone is asking about the approach of acceptance and commitment therapy and whether it has a lot of therapeutic influence. Are you familiar with that, and do you have any comments to make on it?
Yes, acceptance and commitment therapy I see as a friend to existential therapy. For folks that are less familiar with these paradigms, acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT as an acronym, is a behavioral approach utilizing acting on one's values in ways that brings meaning in their life. So, this is related to this idea of existential freedom and existential responsibility. These are very similar ideas, however, different language is utilized within different approaches. So, for any clinicians and therapists within this space, I would encourage you to read books from both schools of thoughts, and whichever one resonates with you more, with your humanhood more, I would encourage you to go that route.
Okay, this was a very lovely talk. Again, it was such an honor to have you here, and we enjoyed it very much. I'm sure the participants did as well.